Background for Pakistan. There is a span of history to be comprehended before Muhammad Ali Jinnah is brought back into the story. From the wane of the Mughal rulers to the reawakening of the Muslims under Jinnah's will, almost 2.5 centuries later, in between were the years of increasing humiliation for the Muslims, from causes within and without themselves. The first part of the history is told concisely in one paragraph of the Encyclopaedia Britannica. On the death of Aurangzeb in 1707, the decline of the Mughal Empire set in with extraordinary rapidity. 10 emperors after Aurangzeb are enumerated in the chronicles, but none of them has left any mark on history. His son and successor was Bahadur Shah, who reigned only 5 years. Then followed in order three sons of Bahadur Shah, whose united reigns occupy only 5 years more. In 1739, Nadir Shah of Persia, the sixth and last of the great Mohammedan conquerors of India, swept like a whirlwind over Hindustan and sacked the imperial city of Delhi. Thenceforth, the great Mughal became a mere name through the hereditary succession continued unbroken down to the time of the mutiny. Real power had passed into the hands of Mohammedan courtiers and Maharatha generals, both of whom were then carving for themselves kingdoms out of the dismembered empire. Until at last British authority placed itself supreme over all. This authority of the British began with the valiant exploits of Clive and became supreme over all a century later, with Napier's conquest of Sindh in 1843, the destruction of Sikh authority over the Punjab in 1849, and the annexation of Oudh in 1856. In 1856 also, Lord Canning arrived in India as Governor General, having declared before the Syed, "I wish for a peaceful term of office. But I cannot forget that in the sky of India, serene as it is, a small cloud may arise no larger than a man's hand, but which, growing larger and larger, may at last threaten to burst and overwhelm us with ruin." The small cloud arose in the following year, when the Sipais of the Bengal army mutinied and all the valley of the Ganges from Patna to Delhi rose in open rebellion. In 1 month, 30,000 native troops deserted from the army in northern India. Three statements from the many made before the transfer of the government of India to the Crown revealed the British reaction to the horrors that spread and endured for a year and a half. At Balmoral, Queen Victoria and Prince Albert opened a map of India and studied the reports of the massacre at Cawnpore, the hideous unheard of murders, unspeakable cruelties done to poor ladies and children. The Queen wrote to the Empress Augusta of the 1,000 Europeans besieged Hungary and in terror. Within the walls of Lucknow, and of the terrible dangers of the 24,000 Britons at the mercy of a million rebel Indians, she added, "There is hardly a family who has not lost a relation or is not in anxiety about them." The Queen thought no punishment severe enough for the perpetrators of these awful horrors, but she agreed that the innocent ones, whatever their race or religion, should not be made to suffer. Prince Albert wrote, with informed detachment to the Prince of Prussia, "The Indians are not a people capable of conquering independence for themselves, to say nothing of maintaining it. Since the days of Bacchus and Nimrod, India has constantly been overrun and conquered by new races, the Assyrians and Persians, the Greeks under Alexander, the Hyungyu, Tatars, Arabians, and others, down to the most recent times. The conquerors have brought under the yoke and oppressed the races whom they found in possession, but have neither rooted them out nor absorbed them. Thus they remain intermingled, but without national coherence." The third statement was part of a letter written from India by Lord Canning to Lord Granville, President of the Council. As long as I have breath in my body, I will pursue no other policy than that I have been following. I will not govern in anger, justice, and that as stern and inflexible as law and might can make it. I will deal out. But I will never allow an angry and indiscriminating act or word to proceed from the government of India as long as I am responsible for it. Among the races described by Prince Albert as intermingled but without national coherence were the 50 odd million Muslims who, with the decline of the Mughal Empire, had lost pride, property, and power, especially in the Hindu dominated areas where they lived in degradation and misery, excluded from all but humble posts in the British administration. The tragic circumstances of the Muslims at last bred the leader they needed. His name was Syed Ahmad Khan, the first Muslim in India who dared to speak of partition, the first to realize that mutual absorption being impossible, the Hindus and Muslims must part. He was the father of all that was to happen, ultimately in Muhammad Ali Jinnah's mind. There is a photograph of Syed Ahmad Khan taken when he was a very old man. He had the splendid eyes, the noble brow, and the strong yet benevolent look associated with wise leadership. In the photograph, these features are given a patriarchal air because of his immense white beard. Beneath are printed his name and ultimate titles: the Honorable Dr. Sir Syed Ahmad Khan Bahadur, KCSI LLD. Syed Ahmad Khan was born in 1817 of a family that claimed spiritual sanctity because of their descent from the Prophet. His father was a religious recluse, his mother a daughter of the Prime Minister at the Mughal court. Syed Ahmad Khan might therefore have embraced the traditions and conventions of his forebears, without question, but he was marked for lonely and independent flight. When he was a baby, his aristocratic grandfather noted his unusually large hands and feet and said, "A burly rustic has been born in our family." Like Muhammad Ali Jinnah, born almost 60 years later, Syed Ahmad Khan was plunged from security to poverty when he was still in his teens. Like Jinnah, he studied the law. He began work as a clerk, but such were his scholarly habits and energies that at the age of 24 he was a munsif or sub-judge. From 1846 to 1854, he worked in the law courts in Delhi, growing in experience, mind, and character. The once important Mughal city had lost much of its princely glamour, but out of the shabbiness and rubble, new Muslim thought was springing. Syed Ahmad Khan found himself surrounded by young voices chanting the virtues of reform, and he soon became their leader. He had been bred on the basic theology of Islam, but he was too lively in mind to be obsessed with the past or to be sentimental about the melodies of his people. Some years later, he wrote of the Muslims: "They are under the influence of false and meaningless prejudices and do not understand their own welfare. In addition, they are more jealous of each other and more vindictive than the Hindus and suffer more from a sense of false pride. They are also poorer, and for these reasons I fear that they may not be able to do much for themselves." Syed Ahmad Khan was something of a changeling in the Muslim brood, a realist, and too cautious to be trapped into frenzy. During these early years, when he watched the Muslims wilting in their fight for survival against the astute Hindus, he believed that the only hope for his people was in cooperation with the British. In 1857, at the time of the mutiny, Syed Ahmad Khan was 40 years old and he had been in the judicial service for almost 20 years, still a young man, but mellow with experience. During the mutiny, he proved his partiality for the British by shielding some of them in his bungalow. When a mob of fanatics came to his door, he went out unarmed and turned them away. When the mutiny ended, Syed Ahmad Khan wrote an honest and startling book, The Causes of the Indian Revolt, which was to influence and help to change the fortunes of India. The book was distributed only to British officials. Some of them thought it highly seditious, but they heeded its warnings. His language was mild compared with the fiery charges made by Burke in the British Parliament 75 years before. Syed Ahmad Khan's plea for government of the people, by the people, for the people makes sound and polite reading now. He wrote, "Most men agree that it is highly conducive to the welfare and prosperity of government. Indeed, it is essential to its stability that the people should have a voice in its councils." Other sentences confirm the reasonableness of his argument. The people have no means of protesting against what they might feel to be a foolish measure or of giving public expression to their own wishes. Then this bitter comment on the cause of so much mischief in the British conduct of India. There is no real communication between the governors and the governed, no living together or near one another, as has always been the custom of the Mohammedans in countries which they have subjected to their rule. Syed Ahmad Khan stated that it was for the government to try and win the friendship of its subjects, not for the subjects to try and win that of the government. He added, now the English government has been in existence upwards of a century, and up to the present hour it has not secured the affections of the people. Among the many British officials whose consciences were stirred by these criticisms was Alan Octavian Hume. He wrote, it was after reading Syed Ahmad Khan's book on the causes of the Indian Mutiny that I first felt the need for having a forum of public opinion of India, and eventually the Indian National Congress came into existence. Before describing the arrival in Congress of Muhammad Ali Jinnah as secretary to Dadabhai Naoroji in 1906, other events and thoughts in the story of Syed Ahmad Khan must be observed. Events and thoughts that influenced the formation of Jinnah's mind and ambitions. As early as 1867, Hindu leaders in Benares began a movement to replace Urdu, the chief language of the Muslims, by Hindi. This episode convinced Syed Ahmad Khan that the two communities, Muslim and Hindu, would never join wholeheartedly in anything. He made this statement to the British Divisional Commissioner at Benares and added, at present there is no open hostility between the two communities, but on account of the so-called educated people it will increase immensely in future. He who lives will see. Thus was born the thought of the parting of the peoples, to which Muhammad Ali Jinnah became the heir. Although many years were to pass before he acknowledged that it was his destiny to fulfill Syed Ahmad Khan's disturbing prophecy. The next great achievement, which was to influence Jinnah, was the founding of Aligarh University, first called the Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College at Aligarh in the United Provinces. The foundation stone of the college was laid in 1877 by the Viceroy Lord Lytton, but the vision and the will that made a reality of the vision was Syed Ahmad Khan's. He aimed to produce, through the college, an educated upper class of Muslims who might lead their people out of despair and ignorance towards humanism and intelligent government. English professors and lecturers, including Sir Walter Raleigh and Sir Thomas Arnold, the great Orientalist, served on the staff of the college, and during the next 50 years, an entirely new class of Muslims was bred in India. Scholars, reformers, teachers, and politicians who, for the first time, were able to wave a lamp of hope before their co-religionists, hope of dignity and emancipation. Among the many evils corrected by Aligarh was the sad state into which the Muslim language had deteriorated. When the Muslims had been degraded and excluded from public office, their language had been reduced to a minority tongue. They were no longer aware of trends of contemporary thought, for they produced little literature of their own, nor could they read what other men were writing. Aligarh helped to disperse this cloud of ignorance. Their own language, Urdu, regained its self-respect as a language of scholarship and not merely an untidy means of speech. Also, English and European literature was made available to the students, and they became alive to the spread of liberalism in England. Aligarh taught its Muslim students to think for themselves in both English and Urdu, and they were encouraged to revive their own literature. Syed Ahmad Khan also founded the Mohammedan Educational Conference to engender enthusiasm for social reforms, modern education, and general economic and intellectual progress. Until the Muslim League was founded in 1906, the Mohammedan Educational Conference was the first and only parliament for the Muslims in India. During the birth of these lofty intentions, the enmity between the Hindus and Muslims increased. It became all the more savage because of the so-called educated people, who had learned to organize and direct their rancor. In 1893, there were vicious anti-Muslim riots in Bombay. Sir Syed Ahmad Khan was then 77 years old. He had been knighted in 1877 and he was the undisputed leader of his people. In Makers of Pakistan and Modern Muslim India, the effect of these riots is described. This state of affairs intensified Syed Ahmad's fears. He began to wonder that if under the British rule, Hindus wished to exercise so much pressure against normal civic rights of Muslims, what would be the state of affairs if the British left India and the reins of government passed into the hands of the majority community? Sir Syed Ahmad Khan was full of grave apprehensions about the fate of the Muslims. In a speech in 1883, 10 years after the Bombay riots, he had said, "Now suppose that all the English were to leave India, then who would be the rulers of India? Is it possible that under these circumstances, two nations, the Mohammedan and Hindu, could sit on the same throne and remain equal in power? Most certainly not. It is necessary that one of them should conquer the other and thrust it down. To hope that both could remain equal is to desire the impossible and the inconceivable." There was another Muslim leader, the Aga Khan, who was also aware of the importance of British rule to the safety of his people. In his book India in Transition, he wrote of the state of the Muslims during the last decade of the 19th century. The average Indian Muslim looked upon himself as a member of a universal religious brotherhood, sojourning in a land in which a neutral government with a neutral outlook kept law and order and justice. While his allegiance was to Queen Victoria, his political self respect was satisfied by the existence of the sultans at Constantinople and Fez, and of the Shah and Khedive at Tehran and Cairo. The fact that the British government was the mainstay and support in the diplomatic arena of the independent Mohammedan states was naturally a source of continued gratification to him. During most of this time, Muhammad Ali Jinnah was still in England, unaware that Sir Syed Ahmad Khan was creating for him the two beliefs that there were to dominate the latter half of his life. That separation of the two chief races in India was inevitable, and that only through education might the Muslims find the way to freedom, peace, and reason. When the first generation of Aligarh students was already helping the Muslims towards a larger life and freedom of heart, Jinnah was still tramping between Lincoln's Inn, the British Museum, and his lodgings in Russell Road. Later, when he was a middle aged man, he spent many days at Aligarh, talking to the students, usually in the role of stern disciplinarian, concerned with their responsibilities rather than their ambitions or grievances. One evening, some students of another college called on him to seek his guidance. When some of them were critical of their elders, Jinnah interrupted them with the question, "How many of you have lamps on your bicycles?" Only one could say yes. Jinnah quickly answered, "Do not criticize others when you yourselves have not yet learned to respect the sanctity of the law." This was his outward method with the young, but behind the brusque words was tenderness. Aligarh was largely the focus for this emotion when he was older. There he could find the young thinkers who would listen to the phrases of wisdom he liked to scatter when he was in a mood for moralizing. Proof of this devotion to Aligarh lies in the 2 or 3 short pages of his will, written on some sheets of Legislative Assembly paper on 30 May 1939, 8 years before the partition of India. Subject to family bequest and gifts to certain institutions, Jinnah ordered the rest of his fortune to be shared between Aligarh University, Islamia College at Peshawar, and the Sindh Madrasa in Karachi, where he had been a schoolboy. Jinnah never revised his will even after partition. Although Aligarh was then in alien territory, he did not withdraw his gesture. Through the long months in 1948, when he knew that he was dying, he did not change his mind. Over small things, the rationing of tea to his staff, the price of a tie, the amount of petrol used in his car, he could be exasperatedly pennywise. Over any immense issue such as this endowment of Aligarh, there was no rancor or pettiness in his heart.